brings it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
A minute past one, a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African perspective. From the heart of Africa to the corners of your world, 60 minutes, one planet, countless stories. Join us as we navigate the day's top stories in 60 minutes from the continent and beyond. We bring you the news, the voices and the perspectives that matter. Welcome to you. I am indeed Sipiso Magwita. Remember, you can reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. What's your perspective? What's happening in and around your world that we're not reflecting? WhatsApp hotline number that you can send your thoughts to 063 406 9126 406 9126 and the prefix, of course, 063. We'd like to hear from you, and of course you can also speak to us on the socials at Channel Africa 1. That's on TikTok, Instagram, on YouTube, and of course you can also speak to us on Facebook. Let's go straight to our top stories this hour. The United Nations and aid groups have revealed that U.S. President Donald Trump's administration have cancelled a major contract to supply emergency kits for rape survivors in the Congo as violence surged in the east this year. This has left thousands without access to life-saving medication. The emergency kits include medication to prevent HIV and other sexually transmitted infections, as well as unwanted pregnancies. And Tlantla Mahlangu has more of this.
According to Reuters news agency, the decision to cancel the contracts for around 100,000 post-rape kits has not been reported previously. The U.S. Agency for International Development contract was intended to resupply Congo's war-ravaged eastern provinces for the year and left thousands of health centers without provisions when fighting was escalating. The State Department, which manages U.S. aid, has not responded to repeated requests for comment. Reuters also says it spoke to officials at the United Nations and 4 other aid groups that treat rape survivors in eastern Congo for verification on the story. A team also visited a site in South Kivu province to talk directly to health workers and survivors. For Channel Africa News, I am Tlantla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
And of course, we will take you through some of the major stories, not just on the continent, but around the world. So staying with the United States, let's see what's happening with the relationship between the U.S. President Donald Trump and his former advisor. We're talking Elon Musk here. He has stepped up his criticism of the president's tax and spending bill as senators continue to vote on amendments. Musk has condemned the bill as insane. More from the BBC's Jake Kwan.
President Trump is chastising any holdouts to pass this bill. It is a very slim margin. And we just saw that Elon Musk not only threatened to start his own party, but he will back any politicians to run against the Republican members who will be voting for this bill come the midterms election next year. So the Republican lawmakers who are in the chamber right now are really stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you have the world's richest man who is threatening to fund your opponents next year. And on the other side is, of course, President Trump.
Israeli planes and tanks have continued to attack areas north and south of Gaza, reportedly destroying homes and prompting thousands of residents to flee. The Israeli army says it's launched a review of a strike yesterday on a seafront cafe in Gaza. The BBC's Wyatt Davies has the details.
Overnight, Iran launched 2 waves of missiles in response to the Israeli attacks, setting off air raid alerts in parts of central and northern Israel. The attacks were less intense than the previous nights, and there were no reports of direct impacts or casualties. Speaking to the London-based Iranian International Television channel, Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel had significantly damaged Iran's nuclear and ballistic missiles programs, but that his forces still needed more time.
Reports from Turkey say police have arrested at least 120 city officials in Izmir, a stronghold of the opposition CHP. Prosecutors ordered the detentions early in the morning as part of a corruption investigation. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's main political rival, Erkem İmamoğlu, Imamoglu was arrested in a similar operation in Istanbul in March. The BBC's Emery Tamal has more.
Izmir is Turkey's third largest city and has been run by the main opposition Republican People's Party, or CHP, for more than 2 decades. 157 arrest warrants were issued on corruption charges this morning. More than 120 people, including Izmir's former mayor Tunç Soyer, were arrested. CHP denies accusations of corruption. Murat Bakan, an MP from the party in Izmir, said members were facing a similar crackdown to what happened in Istanbul earlier this year.
And finally, we tell you about this. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the international debt architecture needs a profound change and concrete solutions at his keynote address at the second day of the 4th International Conference on Financing and Sustainable Development. Sanchez shared several proposals that he said will ensure that the sustainable development goal is achieved and reached. He emphasized that the core problems need to be addressed.
We need to address the structural problems that prevent many countries from stabilizing their debt while investing in their future. In this regard, I would like to highlight and support a proposal advocated by the Jubilee Commission, a multilateral fund that enables countries to buy back their own debt at a discount on secondary markets before it falls into the hands of vulture funds.
One hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
So let's get straight to it. Our top story is the saga feud between Donald Trump and Elon Musk has been reignited, with the US president suggesting that the South African-born billionaire should head back home. It comes after the tech businessman threatened to form a new political party and challenged Republican lawmakers running for re-election. Nick Harper sends this report from Washington.
From bromance to bust-up, relations have continued to worsen between US President Donald Trump and Elon Musk. At issue is the billionaire's staunch opposition towards the president's key signature legislation, the Big Beautiful Bill, which President Trump is hoping Congress will pass before Friday this week. Musk has criticized the bill, as a non-partisan organization predicts it will add $3.3 trillion to the US national debt, as well as cuts to key services and healthcare provisions for vulnerable Americans. Musk has called Trump's legislation insane and has promised to launch the America Party, a third political party to rival the Republicans and the Democrats if the bill passes. He told his 220 million followers on X the US needs an alternative to the Democrat-Republican uniparty so that the people actually have a voice. The tech guru has also threatened to fund anyone who wants to challenge Republican lawmakers who are coming up for re-election. That's despite Musk being the country's biggest Republican donor, donating almost $300 million to Republican candidates in the 2024 election. Well, as you'd expect, Donald Trump has not taken the criticism well. He's already threatened to cut government contracts and subsidies for Musk's companies, including Tesla and SpaceX. And in one of his latest posts has added that without subsidies, Elon would probably have to close up shop and head back home to South Africa. And the president has suggested the department that Musk recently headed up, the Department of Government Efficiency, should now investigate Musk's companies and look for ways to save the government money. The president adding there would be big money to be saved. Nick Harper, SABC News, Washington.
Africa at Play with NATO and ETO Chairman.
The Confederation of African Athletics, CAA President Mr. Hamad Kalkaba Malboum, talk to us about the state of athletics in Africa as it stands, and what picture are you looking at 5 years later?
Yeah, athletics in Africa is strong. We are able to organize our major events in time. Like this year, we will have the under-20 and under-18 African Championship in Nigeria. Next year, we will have the senior Tanzania, in Ghana. And 2027, we will go back to Algeria to organize the under-18 and under-20. And then 2028, we will have the senior championship in Gaborone in Botswana. Well, by this program, we can increase our performance. And at the same time, we are considering the fact that within the Police Federation, they are identifying young talent every year within the national program, within the scholarship championship. And so the athletics in Africa is in good standard.
Live every Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Central African Time.
Africa, voici Abedi.
Oui, c'est moi.
Abedi est un passionné de musique dans l'âme. Il a un goût pour toutes sortes de musique et passe ses journées à écouter Channel Africa.
J'aime beaucoup la musique africaine.
Ok. Devinez quoi? Channel Africa veut aider Abedi et les mélomanes du monde entier à découvrir encore plus de musique incroyable. C'est pourquoi Channel Africa appelle les artistes africains à soumettre leur musique. Chers artistes, n'oubliez pas de nous fournir toutes vos informations pertinentes à l'email adresse musique@channelafrica.co.za. Les soumissions sont votre chance d'être entendues, mais elles ne garantissent pas une playlist. Toutes les soumissions seront soigneusement examinées pour voir si elles répondent aux exigences de notre station. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
12 minutes past 9, the African Perspective continues here on Channel Africa, this time through Africa World Hour, 60 minutes of the very latest news from the heart of Africa to the corners of the world. I am Tsepiso Magwitla. Thanks for joining us. Our top story, the recent protests from Malawi have been set to highlight violent attacks on peaceful protesters, with police reportedly failing to intervene. These events have sparked serious concerns about civil liberties and fairness of the upcoming general elections in September. To speak further about this, the implications for Malawi's democracy, we speak now to Idris Ali Nasa, Senior Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Idris.
Thanks, Tsepiso, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Could you please just document for us these attacks on protesters and the nature that they have, or the character that they have taken on? Because it does seem to sound as though it's heavy-handedness by police for people who are voicing out their thoughts or concerns about processes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Malawi has been experiencing this troubling trend, since the last 2 years or so, where you have, people gathering to protest for one cause or another, and these protests are disrupted violently by unidentified men, sometimes, masked, hiding their identities, who disrupt these, beat up protesters, violently, disrupt the peaceful gatherings of civil society, opposition parties, civil servants as well. Last year in November, we had civil servants, protesting, and that protest was violently, disrupted by men carrying various sorts of weapons, beating civil servants up. And also we had another incident last year as well, where civil society members were gathering to pressure the Malawi Electoral Commission to open the voters' roll for inspection. Yet again, we had some unidentified thugs, most of them masked with weapons, disrupting this. Recently, last week on June 26th, we had a group of unidentified men also severely assaulting, violently disrupting a legal, peaceful protest that was called by a civil society organization that was calling for the Malawi, for an independent audit of the voters' roll.
And I don't know why, actually, I have this vision in my head. It reminds me of South Africa in 1992 in the East Rand of Johannesburg, specifically Katoras, ahead of the elections, where, of course, men were recruited from the hostels, put into the Katoras community to literally take out male children or the men of the community. So the point I'm making is that it sounds like these are commissioned militia, and there have been allegations that these could be related to youth militia aligned to the MCP. How true have these allegations been proved to be, if investigated at all?
What is very troubling about all these protests, the last few years and last week's protests, is that the men who are responsible for violently assaulting peaceful protesters have done this in full view of the police, and there's been some very debilitating and unexplained apparent unwillingness by the police to intervene to stop these violence against unarmed peaceful protesters. And to date, as far as we know, there's not been anyone who's been arrested, held to account for disrupting, beating up peaceful protesters. So this gives grave concerns about, number one, who is behind the disruption, who stands to benefit from these disruptions. Secondly, why are the police not taking action and arresting these people? Because and last week's disruption was a case in point where it was done in full view of the police. Members of the police were there, but they did not arrest anyone. So this raises concern to say, who stands to benefit from this disruption, and secondly, who is behind them? There have been allegations. And the main opposition party, the Democratic Progressive Party, has been alleging that these disruptors, these violent persons, are aligned to the ruling Malawi Congress Party youth militia, and the ruling party has denied these allegations that these are not people's from their youth militia. But the troubling question yet again is, why have the police not taken action against these disruptors?
And I believe journalists were saying that the police have not responded to their queries about why they appear to be willing bystanders when these human rights abuses occur, because they have an obligation to protect citizens who should enjoy freedom of expression of their rights.
And absolutely, and that is very troubling because domestic law, for example, the Malawi's own constitution, chapter 38 of it, guarantees the freedom to protest, the freedom to gather and protest with others. And Malawi is also a state party to various international and regional, conventions that could give rise to the right to peacefully protest, peacefully assembly. And then the state has a duty to facilitate the enjoyment of these rights, the enjoyment of the right to peaceful assembly, the right to peacefully protest. So the state has a duty and an obligation to facilitate its citizens to enjoy these rights. So there are articles that govern these rights, yet there is a clear dereliction of duty by the state, by the law enforcement agencies in Malawi, and that is actually troubling. And that gives a rise to us as Human Rights Watch to say, will the state be able to have infrastructure that will enhance its ability to conduct this September general election in a fair and impartial manner? So that is actually a very troubling instance. Yes.
So let's focus on some of those issues that have been raised by protesters at these demonstrations, particularly to do with the electoral process. And is there hope that there will be a free and fair environment to carry out the plebiscite?
So last week, for example, an organization calling itself Citizens for Credible Elections, was actually holding this protest simply because the Malawi Electoral Commission has refused to open the voters' roll to an independent audit. So that's really troubling, to anyone to say, if the Electoral Commission is not ready and willing to be held to account in terms of having a verifiable voters' roll, then that is problematic. So ahead of this election, Malawi has to show evidence that it is ready to meet its international, regional, and national obligations to allow people to vote and have an election that is credible, fair, and free from any insinuations of unfairness. So the credibility of this election, as far as we are concerned, will be measured against standards that are set out in the African Union's Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, as well as the Southern African Development Community's principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. So under these principles, right, member states, like Malawi is a member state, they are expected to observe and respect the full participation of citizens in the electoral process. So Malawi has to ensure that the full participation of its citizens in the electoral process, including access to the voters' roll, verifying the voters' roll. There also has to be freedom of expression and association. That has to be respected. There has to be political tolerance. There has to be independence of the judiciary, independence of the media, impartiality of the electoral institution. In this case, the Malawi Electoral Commission, impartiality of the law enforcement agencies. In this case, the Malawi Police and enforcement agencies.
Idris Ali Nasser, Senior Africa Researcher at Human Rights Watch, speaking to us about the democratic environment in Malawi at the moment and the role of or lack thereof in the protection of citizens in Malawi. Brings the time to 22 minutes past 9.
Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mukwenata@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Your weekday afternoons have been upgraded by The Upside with me, Tebohole Khuleni, and my partner in crime, Nompumelelo Ngubeni.
And if you want to find out all things luxury, fashion, travel, and arts and culture, this is exactly the place to be.
If it's hip, if it's happening, we are talking about it. We talk about what's now, what's next, and most importantly, what matters most on the African continent and the diaspora.
Do you know what time it is? Catch us every weekday on Channel Africa from 1 to 4 p.m. Central African Time.
Yeah, that's us every weekday afternoon.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
24 minutes past 9, we continue with Africa World Hour, this Tuesday edition here on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Now, we've been speaking about democratic rights and the role of state actors such as the police. This time we go to Hong Kong. We were in Malawi. Now we talk about what's happening in Hong Kong as a recent Amnesty International report shows that since the country's national security law came into effect in 2020, more than 80% of those convicted were charged for peaceful expression that should not be criminalized. Bail is denied in nearly 90% of those cases, with many detained for almost a year before trial. Sarah Brooks, China Director at Amnesty International, joins us now to talk about these findings and what needs to happen next. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
So when we talk about the law coming into effect, and we've seen about 80% of those who've been detained or even arrested as a result thereof, can you just give us a context of what happened before Hong Kong implemented this law and what would have driven it?
Of course. The law was imposed by Beijing in June of 2020, so 5 years ago, Monday, and this was largely in response to mass, largely peaceful protests against efforts from the Hong Kong legislature and the Beijing government to adopt first a law on extradition. These grew to encompass a whole range of demands for democratic rights and the respect for human rights in the city. And as a result, in June of 2020, the national security law for Hong Kong was put in place. And at the time, we raised significant concerns about its vague definitions, its broad application, and the potential that would be used to crack down on dissent. 5 years later, that's exactly what we see.
And you say all of this under the pretext of national security.
Exactly. The concern was that the protests were getting out of hand. The Hong Kong government frequently refers to this as rioters, despite the fact that most were peaceful protesters, and they tend to defend the police. Although Amnesty had documented significant cases of police violence and violent dispersal of the protests, even when those were children, elderly, medical workers. So the situation in 2019 was incredibly tense. What we've seen with the imposition of this law is a significant chilling effect. The vibrancy and the debate and the culture of movements and people going out on the streets in Hong Kong has been effectively erased.
And have you found that the modus operandi is systemic in terms of arresting those who are found at these protests, that the intention is for a long incarceration before even considering a trial?
Of the cases that we reviewed, many of these were post-protest period, but people who had been deeply involved in the organizing of protests, people who had a long history of civic engagement, people representing trade unions, opposition political parties, community groups. What they have in common is that they were critical about the government's policies and they were vocal about that. What our concern is, just to walk through very quickly the findings, is that the speech that has been criminalized in 85% of these cases is nothing more than what you might expect somebody who deeply believes in the autonomy of their city or in human rights to say. There were very, very few cases where anything in the documents appeared to come close to violence, much less actually cross the threshold that international law requires for a restriction on freedom of expression. Then we have the issue of bail, where effectively the national security law says you're not presumed innocent. You have to prove to the judge and convince them that you won't conduct other criminal acts in order for them to let you go. So they've overturned the presumption of innocence. And between that and the criminalization of legitimate expression, even 1 day in pretrial detention is too much less the 11 months on average and 12 months median that we saw in our sample.
And just in the application of the NSL, can you give us examples of what you would say is the simple act of peaceful demonstrations or expression of their democratic rights that then the government will align to or say is akin to sedition?
So sedition is one element actually that predated the national security law. It was a leftover from the colonial era crimes ordinance. What's interesting is that it hadn't been used throughout the colonial era from 1960 until 2020. So it wasn't until these protests broke out, until there became a crisis of confidence in Beijing and a real concern about the expression of a desire for democratic rights in Hong Kong, that we saw sedition as a crime being used. That has now been taken off the books and replaced by the National Security Ordinance, which is a local Hong Kong law. It sits parallel to the national security law and in fact goes even further in increasing the penalties for seditious speech and in broadening the scope of what could be considered seditious. Just as a few examples, we've seen t-shirts that have phrases reminiscent of the protests, things like "Glory to Hong Kong," images of protest slogans, the organizing of a commemoration of the Tiananmen massacre in Beijing. And even a children's book that features sheep. All of these are things that have been considered by the courts seditious, such that people have been convicted and sentenced to prison.
And you
in this context, it's clear there can be no legal ground.
And you sent these concerns to the Hong Kong government, and you say their response is that, in fact, it's contrary to what they're doing, and that is the restoration and the enjoyment of rights and freedoms. So is this mainly for residents of Hong Kong, or, as you said, where there is a record of people speaking out against the government or some of the actions of those in power? Or does it say, for instance, extend to somebody like me, were I to go to Hong Kong and buy one of those T-shirts, wear it, walking around, could I end up being arrested?
That's a great point. So the Hong Kong government has consistently responded to us, and I will give them credit for that, but they have consistently responded by accusing us of distorting the facts or smearing their name or being engaged in fake news. What I think is interesting and what you pull out, though, is that the reason we think this is so important is not only what it means for civic space in Hong Kong, and by extension, what that means for the chances to talk about human rights in the rest of China, but also what it means for members of the diaspora community and anyone else outside of Hong Kong. The thing with both the national security law and the local security ordinance that I mentioned earlier is that they have extraterritorial effect, meaning that, in a nutshell, anyone, anywhere who says something that the Hong Kong government might consider to be seditious or to be a threat to their national security could, in principle, be prosecuted. That's an enormous loophole that I think governments around the world have an obligation to call out and press for it to be closed.
Well, Sarah Brooks, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and sharing those insights from your report. She's the China director at Amnesty International, speaking to us about Hong Kong's national security law. They have compiled a report of the effect of the implementation of the law since it came in to use in 2020.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The Shy Guy, a Morning Switch.
Have you ever listened to a song and then it gives you goosebumps? Cause it takes you way back in the 80s. My goodness. Hey, baby. You hear Yvonne Chaka Chaka there. I wanna talk to the DJ. And then the DJ goes like, hey baby, I've got you on the other side. Huh? There were no WhatsApps then, right? There were no sliding in the DMs at the time. Oh man.
Your weekend mornings are activated with the Shy Guy on the Morning Switch. We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet, Channel 628. 1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
25 minutes to 10. We continue with catching up on the big stories of the day from the continent and beyond. We come to South Africa, where the country has secured just over $40 million in international climate adaptation funding to help protect vulnerable communities from the growing threat of floods, droughts and wildfires. The South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI, will lead the project alongside the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, as well as SALGA and 4 high-risk district municipalities in the country. So it's expected to directly benefit over 360,000 people, with the impact of extending to millions more. To speak about this, we're joined now by Nontsikelelo Mpulo, Director of Marketing Communications and Commercialization at SANBI. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Nontsikelelo.
Good evening, Tapiso, and thank you very much for having me on the show.
So we have seen an exponential growth of green projects in every way, shape, or form. And of course, there have been points of departure on what we're really doing in South Africa, and is it really drilling down to the ordinary people on the ground? So why should people in these 4 districts get excited about this, and how are they going to benefit?
So these projects are actually built off of 10 years of research that the South African National Biodiversity Institute has been doing. We are a direct access funding authority in the country, which means that we've been able to receive funding from international funders for at least the last 10 years. And we've been helping communities in Sekhukhune and in KZN to do adaptation projects that were a demonstration that this 40 million rand can be scaled up. So this is the culmination of a decade of work. So I'll give you an example of the work that we've done. In Sekhukhune, we helped small-scale farmers.
Just before you go on, is it $40 million or rands? $
40 million US dollars. Over 700.
No, it's because you said rands, because I was thinking it.
Sorry, I apologize for that.
I was thinking it's not going to go very far. Okay.
No, it's USD. It's 700 million rand, just over, depending on what the exchange rate is. So what Zambia's been doing on a smaller scale, so we had projects called small scale direct access funding, which we used then to establish a model for helping farmers and people and communities that are drought stricken. Why Sekhukhune is because it is a relatively drought sort of prone area, and so we used that experience to build up to this larger project. And what people will be able to do then is to be able to use the learnings of the last 10 years to scale up. So what that means is that they'll be able to plant drought-resistant crops. We'll be able to tap into systems, underground water systems, that people then can, sort of build boreholes or include access water rather, whereas they don't have the expertise to do so now. And so we'll be teaching that alongside SALGA and the district municipalities will be impacting those 360,000 people directly.
So are you using communities, whatever resources, and I'm talking because we've seen also a growth and on the impact of AI in communities, particularly with the younger members of the communities. So in your critical ecosystems and projects on catchments and wetlands areas of forests, the kinds of projects that you are using for training and sustainability, do they also create room for further growth in that people can come up with their own solutions?
Well, absolutely, that's entirely true. I'll give you an example of what has been happening in KZN. We trained what we called eco-champs to do monitoring of water systems in those areas so that they can report on pollution, on matter that, sort of disrupts the flow of water. And so the basis of this project is that ecosystem infrastructure, which is functioning water channels, wetlands that are healthy. And it needs people to be able to sort of monitor them and then keep them healthy. that is what is going to be the foundation of getting the adaptation projects to take root. So it's not only about sharing, because SANBI is a biodiversity institute, and so we do monitoring and then sharing best practice about how to restore systems. It's not only about that, but it's also about people taking ownership of their own lands and then also then being able to make it much broader.
I want to talk about ownership at a greater level. If we're talking about adaptation goals, and you say, a big part of the project is to strengthen institutional capacity. You're working with SALGA at the moment, and we've seen what the Auditor General was saying, bemoaning particularly that in some cases, lack of accountability of municipalities and districts. So people will be skeptical. How do you get communities to buy in to say, this money will eventually help, for instance, break generational poverty gaps, that it is going towards sustainability and not deep into somebody's pockets who's going to squander the money away?
Well, this is precisely why we're working with SALGA, is to improve that accountability at district and municipal level. And so they're a crucial partner for us to be able to roll this project out. It's going to be about checks and balances. I mean, the Green Climate Fund process, as I said, has been a long time in development, with us demonstrating the ability for the organization to deliver that. But in the last 8 years, the Green Climate Fund has actually helped SANBI and South Africa to develop the institutional frameworks that will make it possible for us to deliver at those levels. And ultimately, the impact is going to be a 20-year-long impact. It's not just the duration of the 8 years that we'll be implementing this project. We're looking to see this sustainably, being implemented by people going forward, so that it makes real impact in people's lives.
I was hoping to ask you this next question, but I suppose it's a conversation for another day. Maybe we'll sit down and have coffee and talk about it. By the way, I'm very passionate about this because the whole issue of sustainability in the face of ODA cuts. It's great to start some of these projects, but if somewhere along the line they are going to end because of lack of funding, it is something that is worrying because of the current environment that we're seeing. But thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated. Nontsikelelo Mpulo, Director of Marketing, Communications and Commercialization at SANBI. And what SANBI is, as we mentioned, they are the South African National Biodiversity Institute. They're going to lead this project of $40 million fund from the International Climate Adaptation Funding to help communities. It's just about 16 minutes to 10.
Ahoy, matey!
Captain here to help, right, boys?
Set sail with us on a digital voyage like no other. Channel Africa has a treasure trove of awesomeness. That is our website and social media pages.
Tell me, why are you here?
We want you to be part of our adventure.
The winds are changing, Captain. And this time...
Imagine a world where curiosity knows no bounds, where entertainment meets enlightenment, and where every click leads to the African perspective. Visit us on our website, www.channelafrica.co.za, or follow us on Instagram or on X at Channel Africa One. Go on, like us on Facebook at Channel Africa One. So, spread the word. Tell a friend that Channel Africa's online variety is what they need on the web. Channel Africa, the African perspective. 1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And as we connect Africa to the world to Africa, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's what we talk about. The interesting, the educational, wherever you are, do tune in live. We are on the SABC Plus app, and of course you can listen to us on the DSTV audio bouquet as we bring you the very latest news from the heart of Africa to all the corners of the world. Now, UNICEF has launched a major new initiative, the Academia for Social and Behavioral Change Network. It's uniting 24 universities from 16 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. The goal to integrate social and behavioral sciences into development programs and policies that directly impact children's lives. This partnership is expected to generate local evidence, build skills, and influence policy by connecting academia practitioners and communities from across the continent. To speak a little bit more about this, we're joined by Sid Shrestha. I do apologize, Sid. I've been trying to practice the pronunciation. Sid Shrestha is UNICEF's Regional Advisor for Social and Behavioral Change. A very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us, Sid.
Thank you very much, Tapiso.
If you can just pronounce your surname for me, just so that I can make sure I'm hearing it right.
Sure. My name is Sid Shrestha.
Shrestha. Okay, got it. Thank you so much, Sid.
You got that right.
Thanks so much for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. So it sounds like a really exciting goal, not only just for academia, but just the interconnection between South Africa, or the southern part and eastern parts of Africa, an exchange of skills, and I think which is much needed because there is a lack of balance in some areas.
Right. Thanks. We actually, like you said, we are from the Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office. Basically, that provides technical support and oversight to 21 countries in both Eastern and Southern Africa. And that's why one of the main things we believe in is the academia. And that is the reason why this Academy for Social and Behavior Change Network is a bold initiative led by UNICEF, like you rightly said, not just the academia, to strengthen how we use this science to improve the lives of children and families across the region. Because not just the partnerships, but how will it impact and improve the lives of the children in the region. The main goal of this initiative or this partnership, or what we call the Academia Network, is to build a strong collaborative platform that brings together universities, researchers, and practitioners to advance. One of the key things is on thought leadership, also on generating evidence and building capacity in social and behavior change and other programs. And if I can go a little bit deeper, we are primarily focusing on 5 key areas. Capacity building. So for example, talking about Southern Africa or South Africa in particular, we are working with various institutions, for example, Wits University, the Free State University in Bloemfontein, to harmonize the training, curriculum, and certification programs in SBC. We are also looking at network building, trying to create a vibrant community of practice across Africa to share knowledge and collaborate on various subjects, right from health to education to social sciences. And linked to that, I was talking about evidence generation just before this. We're also trying to promote innovative interdisciplinary research that will lead to good impact. And when we talk about evidence, what's the use of generating evidence if you do not have influences in policies, right? That's why we're also looking at, trying to use these evidences to influence policies, research to shape better programming. And finally, one of the other things which actually came from the network, it's been a journey. This actually started last year in May 2024, and one of the major asks was to have also kind of a digital platform, not exactly a website, but it's like more like a learning space of this 25. It was 24, and by the evening we have 25 universities now who want a digital platform, and that's what we are going to launch. And why are we going to have a digital platform? It's basically to support virtual learning, resource sharing, as well as joint research and evidence.
So, Sid, let me just jump in there because you
summary,
have pointed out some interesting facts, and I just want to get the conversation along so that we don't run out of time, because you're saying that you want to ensure that there's an identification of decentralized solutions, and one of the things you're going to do is through promoting localized knowledge. So we have mentioned several institutions who are obviously across the region. Can you just give us examples of the unique offering, say, for instance, that Kenya would have or Zambia would bring to the table, particularly focused at children, because that's what the project is focused on?
Okay, that's a good question. I think when we are talking about capacities, it's also the localization of evidence. So many times we feel that a lot of research and data is conducted by experts from outside the region, right? There's like international consultants coming in for, let's take, for example, public health and emergencies. So when I say this, I'm actually averaging across the 21 SR countries we are working on. And that's where we feel that context matters. And that's why this initiative is supporting universities across Africa to lead their own research on issues from immunization, health and education, so that the evidence is locally generated, relevant, and actionable. And when you talk about, you mentioned about Zambia, so I do have a particular example to cite on. So last year when there was a cholera outbreak in Zambia, we meaning the partners, including UNICEF, worked very closely with the University UNZA, which is the University of Zambia, to actually conduct specialized research like the rapid qualitative assessments, which were actually feeding into the Ministry of Health on their implementation. Because when you're talking about the risk communication in emergencies, those data were feeding into what the government was trying to implement on. So these are very evidence done by the local universities themselves, and that's what we want to scale up. Is one of the objectives of this academia network.
And as UNICEF, you're already a step ahead. I'm thinking of just the recently concluded World Health Assembly. I mean, one of the major agreements to come out of that is the Pandemic Act. We're speaking about pathogens, the whole emphasis on the need to share information was obviously one of the stickler points, and something that's still going to be continue to speak about. So this evidence generation and dissemination is what you're already ensuring with this project here on the region.
Yes, definitely. When we talk about evidence generation, it's like not just generating the evidence and studies, but also putting into practice, like what I said in terms of the Zambia example. But one of the other things you remind me of is particularly this region has quite a lot of public health in emergencies. And as you are aware that, there is always a lot of cholera outbreaks in many countries in the region, as well as last year we had a few countries experiencing the Mpox outbreak, right? Then there was the Marburg outbreak. So in all of this, it's beyond, when I talk about evidence, it's not only just about studies, but it's also about, we call it social listening and the infodemics, right? So hearing what is coming out from various digital sources as well as offsite sources, and trying to triangulate that. And that's something which we are also trying to work with universities. So it's not just social media we are talking about, but it's about triangulating information, the noise, the conversations in the digital space, to also help partners, counterparts, working together with universities to ensure that the communication, the communication we are doing, not just the messaging, but the programming we are doing, is actually supporting the integrated service delivery in terms of either development programming or emergency programming.
And you know, for me, Sid, I'm sure you can hear that I'm getting really deep into this, because it's also another area of passion for me as a journalist. I like the fact that you are saying that through this project, what you want to make sure is embedding the social and behavioral sciences into development practice, because sometimes we are at the coalface of translating that, the political aspect of it, to empowering and exposing knowledge to communities. But there seems to be a chasm, because when you talk about sustainability, and as you say, you want to make sure that through this project that the child survives and thrives and is protected. But we can't do that if there is a break in the communication, as you say, that it must be across the board, across society.
Right. That's why we believe that academia. It's actually not a project we're looking at, and you also brought in the important aspect of sustainability. We believe that academia is also a very important factor, and that's where we're also trying to see if the power of partnerships with having so many universities, that they serve as a think tank, not just in the respective countries, but across the region. And that's where we are trying to create a space where universities can work together across north-south and south-south partnerships. And when you talk about communities, I would like to bring in the capacity building element. So let's take, for example, there are bachelor courses in communication, in social work, right? They need to do internships. And that's where we are trying to see if we can bring that internships to good use and not just as a project. And that's where I think the investment in human capital, and as you know, the human capital aspect is being talked a lot about these days as part of supporting the Africa strategy, the Africa agenda for 2063. So trying to bring this new cohort of experienced professionals to bridge the gap, the capacity gap, so that there is much more, not just conversation with the communities, but empowering the communities, not just to understand, but act on it. As simple as going and ensuring that they have full vaccination coverage for their children.
And what I'm also excited about is just hearing about the fact that you also want to see harmonized curricula. But that doesn't mean that you are preventing people from thinking differently, but so that we can all act in concert as a continent that is facing the same challenges.
Yes, I think a good example I would like to give is when we talk about evidence, right? And it's not just a harmonized curriculum, but nowadays, in the recent past, you have a lot of emphasis on this behavioral science. And when we talk about behavioral science, it's not just doing a knowledge attitude practice study or just a quantitative study. What we are looking at is how communities behave, and by finding local solutions. So the participation of the communities more through a qualitative aspect is also what we are trying to instill some harmonization across the universities. And there are, out of the 21 countries, it was very heartening to see that more than 10 universities are actually embarking and providing short-term courses to their graduate courses as well as short-term professional courses.
All right. So thank you so much for speaking to us. Really do appreciate it, and you educating us on this project that you have going on and the vision behind it. So Shrestha is UNICEF's Regional Advisor for Social and Behavioral Change, speaking about the new Academia for Social and Behavioral Change network that they've just launched. It's exactly 10 o'clock. That's how we end Africa World Hour. Thanks for joining us. Up next, Shayla Ndukumana with Hotlines.
Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives